Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of FTT Chats, where we sit down with thought leaders from across FinTech and financial services. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by John Wilkinson, CEO of TMT Analysis. Hello, John.
Hi, Lisa. Morning.
Great to have you with us today.
Nice to be.
John, maybe we could start with you telling us a little bit about you and TMT Analysis.
Great, happy to, delighted. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of TMT. We've been going about 4 years. Our business is a data analytics company, and we focus primarily on mobile intelligence. So we have probably the largest global database of mobile numbering around the world, all of US, Western Europe, Latin America, and many parts of Africa and Asia too. We focus on the routing intelligence, so providing the knowledge about which number resides where, whether a subscriber is active, and various different elements around those mobile numbers. And we provide those services and that data service for anyone looking to use two-factor authentication or one-time passcodes to secure transactions, or social networking, those kind of services. So we're the kind of database that sits behind an awful lot of the routing and services provided by the messaging hubs, the telecommunication operators. And as I say, our primary business is around mobile intelligence, both around the number, but also around the device and linking those different elements together.
So in terms of the type of problems that you're solving for customers, it sounds like it's very focused on the authentication and identity space. Can you give us some practical examples of what that looks like when you work with a client?
Yeah, so today our core business manages about 1 billion queries a month to different mobile networks and different mobile numbers around the world to allow all the transactions and all the two-factor authentications and one-time passwords to take place. In terms of the FinTech sector and new products that we've recently launched, it's about really protection and making that service more secure. And so if you've seen in the market recently, there's an awful lot of fraud and an awful lot of actors who are playing a little bit close to the wind in terms of use of mobile numbers. And so what we've launched is a series of what's called account takeover protection products. And that's, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's things like SIM swap and port swap. That's when basically someone masquerades as you, gets some of your data via a phishing attack or pretending they're you, and then they can grab hold and take over your mobile phone account. And then, of course, they can get access to your one-time passcodes. And if they then, even worse, get access to your credit card, you're in real trouble, and they can steal all your money. And what we've seen in the market recently is really, really massive growth of those types of fraud. Europol just announced they think it's growing faster than credit card fraud. Daily Telegraph just did a really interesting report on more than 1,000% growth in account takeover fraud of mobile phones. So what we're looking to do is bring our data sets that we've used in the wholesale world for the routing of telecommunications and make that data available to fintechs and banks so they can secure and protect their transactions and their customers.
So it sounds like the kind of data set you're talking about can really tell us a lot about the end user. Can you give us some examples of the kind of insights you can gain from that data?
Yeah, so the nice thing about using the mobile is obviously it's a pretty ubiquitous thing now. An awful lot of the world has got a smartphone, particularly in first world economies. The penetration is very, very high. And the other nice thing about those data sets is because of e-commerce, those data sets are being used much more widely than just classic telephony. And so because of that, it's become quite a strong identity tool. Because it has so many different variants of your life associated to it. And so, yeah, we can provide a whole series of rich data on top of that. So we can provide on top of that number, we can say, is it a real user? Has that service been changed recently, which might make it look suspicious? Does it have a live subscriber behind it? Is it pre or post paid? Those kind of elements around intelligence on the mobile, the SIM, and linking that SIM to the device really provides kind of a lock to make sure that the device isn't suspicious. And the other thing I'd say is the really nice thing about those data sets is if you think about them in a kind of FinTech or credit agency type cost, it's a tiny fraction of the cost of doing a much richer, much more expensive cost like an Equifax or an Experian type credit check. It's a very simple way to do a very short, fast, know your customer check to see if that subscriber looks like they might be suspicious or not. And that's really where we're focused in this space, is enriching those data sets. And again, providing them all around the world. So it's 80 plus markets today and growing with a new market at least one a week.
It sounds like that kind of data can play a really important role in the creation of an identity infrastructure, particularly perhaps, and you touched upon this, you're in a lot of different markets where those infrastructures perhaps aren't in place to identify customers.
Yeah, it's a really interesting opportunity, particularly in some markets where bank account coverage isn't as wide. So for your thin client, it's a really interesting bit of information as well, especially when mobile money is used substantially. If you think of Africa, parts of Latin America, there's quite valid and interesting bits of data sets you can take from that. And we've focused really in two spaces in the identity space. One is the protection and looking for suspicious behavior and passing that suspicious behavior back to the customers. But the other area is really around customer onboarding and know your customer type data. So what we do is we connect directly to the mobile networks in many geographies, and they give us the capability to do a name number match in many markets. So what we can do is we can look and do a very simple start off onboarding check of a customer to check that they're the right name and address that you're looking at, the number is valid, and then we can do a ping immediately to that network to see if that number is valid and is correct. And so it gives some security at very low cost at the beginning of an onboarding session, which I think will become more and more prevalent. We see so much growth in e-commerce and mobile usage at the moment, unfortunately, particularly because of the COVID-19. So I think providing more mitigation to the fraud problem and more security and knowledge for anyone making their services available via the internet, I think can provide some serious reinsurance and protection for people.
So you touched on two things, obviously, which are particularly relevant now, COVID-19, and you described some of the kind of threats that are emerging. Are there any kind of trends in that area that you're seeing, new patterns of fraud? I mean, obviously, it's a question of scale as well, but anything interesting that you would point to where your products can really make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing probably 15 to 20% growth a month in terms of one-time passcodes and two-factor authentication, which is kind of strange because most people know SMS isn't really the ultimate answer for this kind of protection, but it is still being used really widely. And so as well as a plan to stop using it, I really think it makes sense for banks and fintechs, whilst they are using it, to have a plan to mitigate the risks. And I just point people to the recent Europol analysis, which is basically saying that because of the virus and because of the increase in phishing that's taking place, it's really there's several companies, doing this kind of fraud on a pretty industrial scale. I mean, weaponized is the term that they're using. And so, it does make sense just to do real simple standard checks. And the nice thing is as well, they're very fast. So we can ping a mobile network and it takes, maybe half a second, probably at maximum half a second to get that response from the customer to us, to the mobile network, and all the way back through. So it's So it's pretty seamless in terms of the customer's onboarding process and doesn't slow them down, much less invasive than a two-factor authentication, for instance. So it should be, much more widely adopted. And we're seeing, to be fair to the mobile networks, we're seeing them adopt it much more as well. So, a lot of the networks now are rolling out protection around their SIM cards and around the devices because they realize the risks that the subscribers are under.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it sounds like it's both a question of scale and the fact that we're all using our phones, for more and more activity. Great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, John. That was really interesting. And I look forward to speaking to you again and seeing you at FTT Virtual Spring.
Yeah, pleasure. I'm looking forward to it. It's next week after, right? So I'm looking forward to that a lot. I'll be there.